We're used to hearing about post-traumatic stress disorder when talking about victims of rape or military veterans suffering from trauma from battle. But there is another group that regularly experiences it. I'm Mike Tucker, and we're here to help you create your best life possible.
This is Lifestyle Magazine with your hosts, Dr. Charmaine Long, Obi DK, Lionel LaMountain, and Mike Tucker.
Rob Michaels, the founder and CEO of Serve and Protect, is here today to explain why so many first responders are dealing with PTSD. Welcome. We're glad you're here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Before I go any further, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder?
Correct.
Okay.
Now, the state of Alaska is trying to redefine it to being not a mental disorder, but being an emotional wound sustained in the line of duty.
Okay, kind of a work-related
Work-related. It would
yeah.
change everything.
Yeah. Now, tell me about your journey, of where it is that you came from in order to found an organization like this.
I was a college dropout surf bum.
Good for you.
And yeah, I thought so.
Yeah.
And I took a couple of college classes because I figured I should.
Yeah.
And a buddy of mine came up to me in Sears, a guy named Doug Smith, and he said, "Man, we need to join the National Guard."
Yeah.
I said, "We who?" He said, "My draft number's #1.
Oh, wow.
I said, "Man, I'm 265. Have a good trip."
Yeah.
And he goes, "No, come on with me." So he talked me into going into the MP.
Uh-huh.
And it's my contention that God gives us direction through other people and circumstance. And I thought, okay, so I'll go do that. So I became an MP. A little bit later, I was working at Penny's, and a guy I grew up with, Tommy Crislip, came by, and he goes, "Why are you selling electronics? You need to be a police officer with Norfolk Police. We're hiring." Okay.
Yeah.
So I went and joined the police department. In '78, I heard a guy named Dan DeHaan speak about Columbia Bible College. He was the chaplain of Atlanta Falcons. He had longer hair and a beard, so he had to be cool.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was the '70s. Come on.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, I need to do that. My wife says, "I think you need to be called." I said, "I think I am." Went to Columbia, got into radio, got a degree in biblical education, met a guy named David Maines, who I'm sure you know, Chapel of the Air. And he said, "Well, if you're going to go to Wheaton," which I figured, I've gone this far, I can't quit now.
Yeah.
Went on and got a master's at Wheaton. He says, "My dad just sold his agency. Go to work for them." Met a guy that was up there named Dave Thompson. And I said, David Maines said I could drive a truck for you. We talked for a minute, and he said, "No, I'm going to hire you, but I'm going to put you on the inside." Now, I wouldn't recommend this during an interview. I looked at him and said, "Have you lost your mind?"
Yeah.
And
not a good way to get a job.
Right,
usually. Yeah.
right. So I did that, worked in marketing and public relations, ended up in Nashville for 30 years in the music business, particularly the Christian music business.
Yeah.
Not a lot of budget, so you learn to do a lot of things yourselves.
Yeah.
Ended up in '08 going to work with the Newsboys running their nonprofit Global Tribe.
Really?
Learned how to do a 501c3 and all of that. So all of those things put together equipped me for what happened in 2011.
Yeah.
I was sitting in church and I was praying. Somebody had my second row seat, so I had to sit in the front row.
Yeah.
Of all the nerve.
It's tough, yeah.
That's right. So I went ahead and sat up there, and God put it on my heart. This is what you need to do. So I already had all the information. I filed my own 501c3, got approved in 10 weeks, and Lois Lerner signed it.
Is that right?
That's exactly right. I framed that bad boy.
Yeah, I bet.
And so did all the incorporation papers and started from there. I like to say that it took me 41 years. That's a year longer than it took Moses.
Yeah.
It would give a career planner nightmares, but it was God's plan to recalculate my route to get me where he wanted me to go, to do what he wanted me to do.
So what does your foundation do?
Well, we work exclusively with public safety. Now, I say exclusively. Every now and then we get calls from veterans. But predominantly our whole focus is threefold: to educate about post-traumatic stress, to facilitate, help them find trauma services in their area that takes their insurance, that understands their job.
Right.
We interview every therapist before we make a referral. And then what we try and do is work with them in recovery and help them on the backside if they go into residential care, to get connected with a therapist on the backside for a continuum of care. And then there's a certain amount of activism that we do. When something happens and an officer's wrongly accused or wrong statements are made, then we do what we can to correct that. I've had articles published in Fox News and the Daily Caller and stuff. That's what we do. We serve families and save lives.
That's exciting. I know that right now a lot of our first responders are under fire.
Yes, sir.
And that's not to say that mistakes have not been made on both sides.
Correct.
We admit that.
Yes, sir.
But there are a lot of really good people working as first responders who are under the gun, so to speak, whose lives are at risk and whose health has been negatively impacted by the circumstances of our world today. Is that not right?
Every 17 hours, a police officer commits suicide. Now, those are active guys. We have no clue the suicide rate among retired guys. 85% have some symptoms of post-traumatic stress. And
85% is an interesting number. I mean, that's huge.
Well, I'm going to tell you it's 100%.
Yeah.
Because you can't unsee things that you have seen. I remember clearly the first fatality I worked. My field training officer was an ex-Marine, and we pulled up on the scene of an accident. Go see what's going on. So I did, and went up there, and there were 6 people in the car. 5 of them were dead because their necks were snapped. That was my first accident. The last one I worked, I was a detective, and I saw in the distance a car spinning on its roof.
Oh, my.
Called it in and went over to the Volkswagen pinned against the telephone pole that was hit by the guy, a drunk driver. It was an 18-year-old college freshman. I put my head in. I heard her breathe her last breath.
Oh, wow.
Car was this wide.
Yeah.
You don't unsee those
No, you
kinds
don't.
of things.
You don't. I don't think that people who have not gone through something like that realize the impact that has on you. And although I've not worked as you have as a police officer or in those settings, I worked for years as a hospital and hospice chaplain. I've attended over 500 deaths. And I can remember at times with the hospital driving home at 3 in the morning after having handled my 3rd or 4th death of the night, just weeping out loud.
Yep.
Just weeping, letting the pain go. When you see those things, when you experience those things, you see the pain of the individuals and their families. It changes you, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And and it's not just first responders or military
Yeah.
or those in your position.
Yeah.
Women who have been assaulted.
Yes.
Domestic violence victims. Children who have been assaulted. Anytime, trauma is nothing more than a normal reaction to an abnormal circumstance. And that's what people deal with. It can give you nightmares. It can cause you to wake up in the middle of the night. It can cause you to weep. It can cause you to do many things. Now, addiction's not one of those things.
No.
That's a byproduct.
It's a byproduct, yeah.
Yes. So anybody can have post-traumatic stress.
Yeah. Well, post-traumatic stress is called a disorder, but I think you're right. That really ought to be referred to more as a brain injury caused by something you've seen or experienced, the trauma that you've gone through.
I call it an emotional wound.
Yeah.
An invisible wound.
Yeah.
Because you can't see it.
No, you cannot.
And, if a guy pulls up in an accident and he sees the car smoldering and he breaks the glass and he reaches in, cuts his arm, they'll bandage that up. There's a protocol of follow-up.
Right.
What if he looks in the back seat and there's a dead baby?
Yeah. Then
That's an emotional wound, and typically they'll do a checkbox and go, yeah, we did a critical incident response. But if they don't follow it up, that's when we have a problem.
And our first responders see things like this on a day-in, day-out basis.
That's exactly right. It's not a singular incident, though it can be.
Yeah.
But more than that, it's the continuum. It's over a period of time. They see I talked to one guy that was a state trooper. He said, I've seen 150 fatalities.
Yeah.
He said, I remember those.
Yeah, you do. You do. And that is an incredible injury, I think, to the brain and to the emotions.
Absolutely.
And so I'm glad that you're doing this work. We need to take a break. We'll be right back with more right after this.
Lifestyle Magazine. We'll be right back.
We're back with Rob Michaels from Serve and Protect talking about trauma experienced by first responders. And we're joined now by Simon Chan, a veteran who is now a trauma therapist. Welcome, Simon.
It's a pleasure.
Now, you've served in the military, is that correct? And you've been overseas?
Yes, I have.
Tell me about that.
So I joined the Army when I was 19. I was a medic in the Army.
Okay.
And so I've been over to Iraq 2 times.
Twice.
First time was 2005. I went there for a year. And the second time I ran was 2008. I went there for a little over 13 months.
13 months.
Yeah, and I served as a medic, as I mentioned. So I was with the line troops in the front line, and also worked at the clinic as well.
As a line, up with the line troops, what did you experience there?
We were doing patrols in southeast Baghdad. That's where we were, and I've experienced a traumatic event back in 2005.
So what was that?
It was on the day of February 26, 2005. So it was just like a regular day, and we had 3 Humvees. We had 3 Humvees in the patrol. I was in the 3rd Humvee. Everybody else were infantry. I was the only medic.
Yeah.
And so the sergeant that was in charge, he was in the 3rd vehicle. And as we were rolling along, he noticed that in the back of the first car, there's a device called a tow bar. And this tow bar was kind of loose. It was about to fall off.
Yeah.
And so he said, we got to stop. We got to fix this tow bar. And at that very moment, it was really odd because he turned around and pointed his finger at me. He's like, Chan, you're the only medic in this convoy. So I don't want anything to happen to you. I want you to be in a safe place. So go ahead and switch out the guy in the first car. And I did that, just following orders. So, and you wonder to yourself, why the first car?
Yeah.
A lot of times they're terrorists, their technology is not so great. So it doesn't, when they press the trigger, it doesn't go off right away. So, and that's why he wants me in the first car. And sometimes they want to get the second car because it's in the middle of the convoy too. So anyways, I switched out. I went over to the first car. We got back into our trucks after we tightened out the tow bar. We kept going for about 10 minutes, and then boom, a bomb exploded in the 3rd car.
Where you had been just previously.
Yes, and that moment I was just shocked. And they yelled for a medic. I didn't have time to process my emotions and that kind of thing.
I just ran
as fast as I could. I've never went as fast in my life. So I ran to the scene, and I saw that their Humvee was pretty much obliterated. It didn't have. But then there's 2 soldiers that came out of the Humvee. One was the sergeant who I just mentioned, and one was the driver. They had minor injuries.
Yeah.
Nothing happened to them. But then I looked to the ground, and I saw 2 guys unconscious. One soldier, of course, was the one who I switched out with.
Yeah.
And so didn't have time to feel sad and all that. Just went straight there, did my assessment. They were both breathing, both had a pulse. And one had a weaker pulse. I decided to do CPR, asked the guy to help me do CPR. And then there's blood in the back of both their heads. I patched them up. The Black Hawk came about 15 minutes later. We got the 2 guys into the Black Hawk. And as the Black Hawk, it was reported when the Black Hawk flew to the hospital, one guy was KIA, was killed, and 5-6 hours the other guy died. And so that was a traumatic incident I faced.
So the guy that changed places with you lost his life. So tell me about the impact that had on you and your emotion.
I mean, I think at the moment that radio was called, that third car's been hit by a roadside bomb. At that moment, I was just, I felt really bad. I would even say I felt guilty.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe it. It was like in a movie. And I think just going back home from that patrol, I was very scared.
Yeah.
I was afraid I was going to hurt again. And personally, I'm a Christian, so I believe that God has a reason for me to be there. Yeah. But I just it was very hard for me. I think the good thing was that I was very open about what happened. So I told my family and friends about what happened. I seek psychological services. I remember just going back to my room. My roommate, he was Puerto Rican. He didn't believe in God or anything, but he's like, Chan, right now you have to be strong in God. Yeah. He was burning a candle, but I was okay. But I had nightmares and stuff. It was really tough time for me.
Rob, the trauma and the impact that Simon had, it's kind of typical, isn't it? Of that sort of experience?
It is. What happened in Dallas?
Yeah.
The guys that survive, like Simon.
Yeah.
Survivor's guilt.
Survivor's guilt. Yeah.
Why me?
Yeah.
Why did I get to live and the other guy didn't? And it goes back to what he said. I don't know. That's a God thing.
Yeah.
But survivor's guilt can be really tough because you can blame yourself, particularly if you were the one that gave the order.
If you gave the order, then of course you.
So that sergeant's probably wondering, well,
did I do the wrong thing or the right thing?
Right. Well, he probably thinks he did the right thing since the medic survived.
Yeah,
that's right.
Survived, yeah.
But he made the right call.
Yeah.
But good grief, when these guys get into shootouts, when it's the same kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's combat.
Yeah.
You know, just like there's a war in Iraq, there's a war on police.
Yeah.
And
So the first responders, obviously, we've got an issue with what's going on with them. Now, you went to therapy and you become a therapist. Is that correct?
Yes, I did go to therapy for that traumatic incident.
Right.
Both when it happened in Iraq and when I came back to
Yeah.
my home station, Georgia, and I became a therapist. I graduated in December. So.
Wonderful. Congratulations.
Oh, thanks.
We're going to take a break,
Okay.
and we'll be back with more right after this.
Stay with us. There's more Lifestyle Magazine coming up.
We're talking with Simon Chan and Rob Michaels about first responders and their dealing with PTSD. Simon, tell me, what are some of the symptoms of PTSD?
Well, Mike, some of the major symptoms of PTSD are flashbacks,
Okay.
paranoia, such as just being over vigilant, nightmares, and just not be able to function daily, such as work, social, that sort of things.
Not being able to function, kind of withdrawing or?
Yeah, especially just withdrawing socially, just
Okay.
want to isolate because the inability to trust them.
If you suspect someone, like a family member or friend, has PTSD, how do you recommend approaching them about that?
Don't approach them as if they're somebody different. Just going there as a friend would, you know, even as a family member, just trying to neutralize the symptoms that they have, and just ask them what kind of feelings they have. And I think as a therapist, I think the most important thing is to ask them, do they have any suicide ideation even?
Yeah.
So.
You know, it seems like whenever we hear, or I've been hearing about PTSD recently, it's always associated with some act of violence. What are your thoughts, or what would be your response to that? It doesn't sound like that's always the case. You mentioned the police officers. Sometimes the people involved in that, they say, oh, they had PTSD. And
it could have been a house fire. I mean, it could be the loss of a child. You know, things that shock your soul. You know, being involved in a tornado or a hurricane. Trauma, I mean, defined, is a normal response to an abnormal circumstance. So whatever that might be, that's what trauma is.
But it doesn't always cause you to become violent.
No, not at all.
Okay.
People respond to trauma in different ways. You know, Simon was talking about how he had the support group and all of that. With police officers, the problem is we're tough guys. You know, so we're worried about what our image will be, and then you worry too. Well, it's coming up on promotion time.
Yeah.
If I tell somebody, are they going to drop the dime on me and tell them I'm weak? You see, there are all kinds of things like that. Families know, though.
Yeah. And PTSD, it doesn't just occur like for policemen and first responders, but
Correct.
any family that's had a sudden loss that maybe was not expected of another family member, that itself creates a brain injury, so to speak, and the trauma experienced with the brain.
Well, and
So,
unresolved grief.
unresolved grief, all of that falls into that same
Yes, sir.
category with similar symptoms as well. Now, alcoholism, drug abuse happens frequently with people suffering from this disorder?
Well, I would say that it's using alcohol and using drugs or any type of it's a way to it's an outlet, and because they don't necessarily have someone to talk to, or they don't feel comfortable talking to somebody, that could be the route stack they take into.
Well, and it's not always the case. Not everybody that has PTSD has an addiction.
Yeah.
And the addiction doesn't always have to be a substance. It can be pornography.
Yeah.
It can be physical fitness. I mean, you see these guys that bulk up. Obviously, I'm not one of them.
Yeah.
But, but you know, addicted to certain things just to divert your thoughts, because that's
Divert
really
the
what's
thoughts,
going on.
Yeah.
You get sleepless, you get anxious.
Yeah.
And
And what's the pathway to healing then, to recovery with PTSD?
Now, as far as the therapeutical perspective, there's different types of trauma therapy. There's one called EMDR. I received that when I came back from Iraq. It was useful, but I think the most important part is helping that person to not feel ashamed of it. I mean, there's many type of therapy. Rather is keeping yourself busy, hang out with your friends, things like that. But I think just normalizing it's okay. You're a human being. I think that's the most important.
The severe cases, can they ever be overcome? Like the really, really bad PTSD situations, can someone overcome them? Because I know there's some severe situations.
Absolutely. I had a guy that was involved in 2 shootings, and he struggled for 20 years. We got him the help.
Yeah.
And I just got an email from a lady who asked the first step. For 2 years, she struggled. She was afraid to call. But she made the decision to call our crisis line.
Yeah.
And our crisis line at 615-373-8000. That number, people answer the phone that understand their job and help them get the right treatment.
Making the call is the first step.
Absolutely.
Was that person who...
I'm going to interrupt you. I
I'm
got a
sorry.
break.
Go
But
ahead.
that's all right. You couldn't tell. You couldn't say. We're going to break right now. We'll be back in just a moment.
Stay tuned for more Lifestyle Magazine.
We've been talking to Simon Chan and Rob Michaels about PTSD and first responders. And Obi, I interrupted you,
Yes, you did.
and so I want you to ask the final question. Would
Thank
you do that?
so much, Mike.
You are welcome.
The situation with the gentleman that you said he struggled for 20 years.
Yes, sir, he did.
Did he get help throughout that 20 years, or was it because it took him some time to finally get help?
No, this particular individual, and it's not uncommon, had sought out people who were therapists, but they weren't trauma therapists.
Oh,
There's a
okay.
difference.
There's a difference.
Because if you've got somebody that doesn't specialize in trauma, they really don't recognize the symptoms. Simon would verify that. I mean, they might send them on to a psychiatrist, and they know how to fix it. I've got a pill for depression.
Yeah.
I've got a pill for anxiety.
Yeah.
He got the wrong help, basically.
But
He
getting
did.
the right help is important.
We got him the right help.
Thank you, gentlemen, for your work and for what you do, and thank you for being here with us.
Thank you.
We want to thank you for being here as well. We always enjoy our visits with you every week. So we'll see you again next week. But until then, you take care of yourself, all right? Bye-bye.
To get a copy of today's offer, call 888-940-0062 and be sure to visit our website at lifestyle.org.